learning sign language as a young child in Sunday school. I remember not knowing what it really was and thinking to myself, I will never use this. But I now realize deaf individuals surround us everywhere. Think about it. How many of you have ever came across a person with a hearing deficit? Until talking with a coworker that is deaf and doing research, I now realize the deaf community experiences things in life differently than a person who is able to hear. There is more to a person than whether or not they can hear, so focus on who they are and not what they can or cannot do. I want to talk about the deaf language and how they communicate. I want to talk about how they experience music without being able to hear. I also want to discuss the deaf community's everyday challenges. Let us start with the deaf language and how they communicate. What is American Sign Language, or ASL? According to the NIDCD, which is the National Institute of Deaf and Other Communication Disorders, ASL is a complete natural language with the same properties as spoken languages, with grammar that differs from English. ASL is expressed by movements of the hand and face. It is the primary language for most North Americans who are deaf or hard of hearing. It is also used by many hearing people as well. There is no universal sign language. Different sign languages are used in different countries or regions, just as spoken languages are. ASL is completely separate from English. It contains all of the fundamental features with its own rules for punctuation, word formation, and word order. For example, English speakers may ask a question by raising the pitch of their voice. ASL users may ask a question by raising their eyebrows, widening their eyes, or tilting their body forward. For a child with deaf parents, picking up ASL would be no different than hearing child learning a new word. It would come natural. But it's more difficult for a deaf child with hearing parents. The hearing parents often learn sign language right along with their child. It is good to learn ASL if given the opportunity. You never know when you may need it. Now that you know a little bit about the deaf language, let's talk about how the deaf community experience music without being able to actually hear it. A lot of hearing people assume that there is only one way to enjoy music, and that is by listening and hearing it. However, deaf people can enjoy music in many ways that differ from people who can hear, but can definitely derive pleasure from it. Deaf people can feel the vibration produced by the music being played. It consumes the vibration throughout their body. According to Hustler's 2011 studies, people who are deaf lack one of the 5 senses, so the other 4 senses work together to make up for the loss of hearing. So even though deaf people may not be able to hear the music being played, they can still enjoy it in full capacity. Now that we have discussed the way the deaf community communicates and experiences music, let's talk about their everyday challenges. According to Robin Cornell's article, Challenges That Still Exist in the Deaf Community, the ADA, which is the Americans with Disability Act, that passed in the 1990s, which sought to level the playing field for those with disabilities. Employers were no longer able to discriminate against those who were deaf or hard of hearing. But even with the ADA, unemployment and underemployment were still a challenge. Roughly 10% of U.S. working age adults who had a hearing deficit were actively looking for jobs, yet still unemployed, with more finding only part-time jobs or temporary employment. Only about 37% were employed full-time, compared to the 55% of their hearing counterparts. Because a large number of people get their health coverage through their employers, 1 out of 10 deaf or hard of hearing individuals aged 21 to 64 did not have health coverage, so getting proper health care was a challenge. Social challenges can be just as difficult for a person who can't hear. Most people the deaf community come in contact with do not know sign language, so a lot of deaf people rely on lip reading when in the public, which leads to frequent miscommunication. Imagine being around people all the time who spoke a different language from you. It can take an emotional toll out on a person. It's a big challenge not to be able to communicate with those around you. As you can see, there are so many things about the deaf community that hearing people don't know or notice. Some things are the same, but there are a lot of differences. ASL users have a completely different language to learn, with the same properties as a spoken language. Even though the deaf community may not be able to hear, they can still enjoy music in full capacity. The deaf community still face many challenges in their everyday life that you may not even notice. So stop and take the time to pay attention. Try to understand their lifestyle. Put yourself in their shoes. I don't know about you, but the next time I come across a person with a hearing deficit, I will be thinking about a lot more than the fact that they can't hear.